Dr. Samantha Rivers hadn't expected to make history when she climbed into her research pod that morning. The quantum readings from planet HD 219134 had seemed routine, just another day studying stellar phenomena in the Cassiopeia constellation. But as her small vessel descended through the planet's atmosphere, the instruments began detecting something extraordinary, signs of advanced civilization. The planet's surface shimmered with bioluminescent structures that seemed to pulse with life. Samantha's heart raced as she guided her pod toward what appeared to be a city, its organic architecture rising like crystalline flowers from the ground. Her excitement quickly turned to concern when she noticed the decay. Entire sections of the city were dark, their once brilliant lights dimming like dying stars. As she brought her pod in for a landing, a group of tall, elegant beings emerged from one of the structures. Their bodies seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and their movements were graceful despite their obvious tension. Samantha knew she was violating multiple first contact protocols, but something in their bearing spoke of desperate need. The tallest of the aliens stepped forward, its crystalline features catching the light of the planet's twin moons. "I am Theron, chief geneticist of the Lumini," it said in perfectly rendered English, thanks to the universal translator. "Your arrival was foreseen by our predictive matrices. We have been waiting." Samantha's scientific training warred with her astonishment. "You've been expecting me? How is that possible?" "Our civilization has achieved great technological advancement," Theron explained, "but we face extinction. Our predictive systems showed that salvation would come from the stars, specifically, from your species." As Theron led her through the city, the story unfolded. The Lumini were an ancient race who had mastered the art of biological engineering centuries ago. They had achieved near immortality through careful genetic manipulation, but their success had come at a terrible price. Their population was failing to reproduce, their numbers dwindling with each passing cycle of their binary stars. "Our children are born without the vital spark," another Lumini named Vestra explained, leading them into a vast chamber filled with incubation pods. Most were dark, but a few still glowed with a weak, flickering light. "We have tried everything within our knowledge to reverse the decline, but nothing has worked." Samantha studied the medical data they showed her, her background in xenobiology helping her grasp the complexity of their situation. The Lumini's genetic modifications had gradually stripped away something essential, a fundamental aspect of life itself that their science had overlooked in its pursuit of perfection. "Your species," Theron said, "maintains a genetic diversity we lost long ago. Our predictive system suggests that human DNA contains elements that could help us restore what we have lost. But we need your help, your willing participation in our research." The implications were staggering. Human genetic material might hold the key to saving an entire civilization. But the risks were equally enormous. One wrong move could lead to diplomatic disaster or worse. "I'll need to contact Earth," Samantha said carefully. "This kind of intervention requires approval from Dash." An alarm suddenly blared through the chamber. Vestra rushed to a control panel, her crystalline features clouding with distress. "Another incubation cluster has failed. 20 potential lives, lost." Samantha watched as the Lumini gathered around the darkened pods, their own inner light dimming in shared grief. The sight struck something deep within her, a recognition of life's fundamental drive to continue, to persist against all odds. She made her decision. "Show me your research facilities. We'll document everything properly for Earth's authorities, but I won't stand by while children die. There must be something we can do right now, even if it's just buying time until official channels can be established." The relief that swept through the gathered Lumini was almost palpable. Theron led her to their primary research center, a vast complex of organic technology unlike anything Samantha had ever seen. As they worked through that first long night, she began to understand why their predictive matrices had guided them to seek human help. The Lumini's technical sophistication was breathtaking, but they had become almost too perfect, too specialized. They needed the controlled chaos that human genetics could provide, the magnificent imperfection that drove evolution itself. Your species still carries the epic story of life's journey in your very cells, Theron observed as they studied the preliminary results. Each human is a living library of evolutionary history. We lost that in our pursuit of perfection. As the planet's twin suns rose, casting rainbow patterns through the crystalline structures, Samantha realized she had already crossed a line. She wasn't just a neutral observer anymore. She had become part of something much bigger, a collaboration that could reshape the future of two species. We should begin with basic genetic mapping, she suggested, pushing aside her exhaustion. If we can identify the key differences between our species' reproductive systems, we might find a way to reintroduce the diversity you've lost without compromising the advancements you've made. Theron's inner light brightened with hope. Then you'll help us? Samantha looked around at the darkened incubation pods, at the faces of the Lumini who had gathered to watch their work. She thought about the regulations she was probably breaking, the protocols being bent if not shattered. Then she thought about the universal drive to nurture and protect new life, a drive that transcended species and stars. Yes, she said firmly. I'll help. Whatever it takes. None of them could have known then just how much that decision would change both their worlds, or the price they would all have to pay for the miracle they were about to attempt. The next few weeks tested everything Samantha thought she knew about genetics and life itself. The Lumini's research facility became her second home, its organic walls pulsing with a bioluminescence that matched her increasingly irregular sleep schedule. Every success brought new challenges, and every failure taught them something unexpected about both species. The compatibility markers are promising, Theron announced one evening, his crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across their shared workspace. But there's something we're missing. The genetic templates aren't stable enough for full integration. Samantha rubbed her tired eyes, studying the holographic display of intertwined DNA structures, human and Lumini genetic code dancing in an impossible double helix. We need to think about this differently, she mused. We're not just dealing with genetics here. There's something more fundamental at work. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Norton, Samantha's former mentor and the only person from Earth she had dared to contact, had finally responded to her encrypted message. His reply was brief but revolutionary: look for the quantum signatures in the genetic bonds. Life isn't just chemical, it's quantum. The idea hit Samantha like a bolt of lightning. Theron, what if your people's genetic modifications didn't just change your DNA? What if they altered the quantum entanglement patterns that help guide biological processes? Theron's inner light flickered with excitement. The vital spark we lost, it could be a quantum phenomenon? But our instruments have never detected dash. Because you weren't looking for it, Samantha interrupted, her fingers flying across the control panel. Human DNA still maintains its natural quantum coherence patterns. We never engineered them out because we never knew they existed. Your modifications might have inadvertently disrupted these patterns in pursuit of perfection. The research team worked feverishly to test this new theory. They developed new scanning techniques that combined human intuition with Lumini precision. The results were staggering. Hidden within the seemingly chaotic structure of human DNA were patterns of quantum entanglement that acted like a biological orchestra conductor, coordinating the complex dance of life itself. But their progress didn't go unnoticed. Word of their work had begun to spread through the Lumini city, and not everyone welcomed the collaboration with an alien species. A group of conservative Lumini scientists, led by the stern-faced elder Carix, demanded access to their research facility. This is an abomination, Carix declared, his usually melodious voice harsh with disgust. Mixing our pure genetic line with primitive alien DNA? You risk contaminating everything we've achieved. Samantha stood her ground, despite feeling distinctly small next to the towering elder. With all due respect, your pure genetic line is failing. The evidence is right in front of you. Sometimes the answer isn't in pursuing further perfection, but in remembering where we came from. We? Carrick sneered. You are not one of us, human. Your presence here is a violation of our most sacred principles. Theron stepped between them, his inner light pulsing with barely contained anger. Our sacred principles include survival, Elder. And adaptation. Or have you forgotten the teachings of our ancestors? The confrontation might have escalated further if Vestra hadn't burst into the chamber, her usual grace forgotten in her excitement. The test embryo, it's viable. And look at its quantum signature. All arguments were temporarily forgotten as they rushed to the incubation chamber. Inside a specially modified pod, a tiny cluster of cells pulsed with a strong, steady light, neither purely human nor purely Lumini, but something gloriously new. The quantum coherence patterns are stable, Samantha breathed, checking the readings. And look at the genetic diversity markers, they're off the charts. Even Elder Carricks couldn't hide his fascination as he studied the readings. The embryo showed signs of both species' strengths, the Lumini's enhanced capabilities and humans' robust adaptability. But more importantly, it showed something they hadn't seen in generations, the potential for natural variation and evolution. This is just the beginning, Theron said softly. If we can replicate these results. If? Carricks interrupted. You assume too much. The council must be consulted. This research must be properly reviewed before dash. A sudden power fluctuation rocked the facility, plunging them into darkness. When the emergency systems came online, Samantha's heart stopped. The quantum containment field around their successful embryo was failing. No, she whispered, rushing to the controls. No, no, no. The next few minutes were a blur of desperate activity. Samantha and Theron worked in perfect sync, trying to stabilize the field, while Vestra rerouted power from other systems. Even Elder Carricks lent his considerable expertise to the crisis. In the end, they saved the embryo, but the close call shook everyone. As they stood catching their breath, watching the tiny life pulse steadily once more, Carrick spoke with unexpected humility. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have been too quick to judge. But you must understand, what you're proposing will change our society forever. Change is already here, Samantha replied gently. The question is whether we guide it or let it overwhelm us. As she looked around at her unlikely team, Theron's steadfast brilliance, Vestra's passionate dedication, and even Carricks's grudging acceptance, Samantha realized that they had crossed another threshold. This wasn't just about saving the Lumini anymore. They were witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a bridge between two species that could reshape the future of both. But as she would soon learn, not everyone was ready for that future. And some would go to extraordinary lengths to prevent it from coming to pass. The discovery came during one of their routine genetic mapping sessions. Samantha had been cross-referencing human and Lumini genetic markers when something caught her eye, a pattern so subtle she almost missed it. She double-checked the results, then triple-checked them, her hands shaking as the implications became clear. Theron, she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to look at this. The Lumini scientist glided over, his crystalline form casting rainbow refractions across the holographic displays. As he studied the data, his inner light began to pulse rapidly, the equivalent of a human's racing heartbeat. This can't be possible, he said, but his tone suggested he already knew it was. Deep within both human and Lumini DNA lay an identical sequence, not just similar, but exactly the same, down to the quantum level. It was ancient, predating both species' recorded histories, and it was no accident of convergent evolution. We're related, Samantha said, letting the words hang in the air. Somewhere in the distant past, our species shared a common ancestor. Vestra, who had been monitoring their successful embryo, joined them at the console. But how? Our worlds are light years apart. Seeds, Theron breathed, his scientific mind already racing ahead. The ancient stories, they weren't myths after all. He quickly accessed the Lumini historical archives, bringing up records that had been dismissed as legends for generations. They told of a time before their civilization achieved its current form, when their ancestors discovered evidence of visitors from beyond their world, beings who had scattered the seeds of life across the galaxy. The precursors, Samantha realized. Every spacefaring civilization has stories about them, but we never found proof. Until now. The shared genetic sequence wasn't just any random bit of DNA, it was a blueprint for life itself, containing fundamental instructions for adaptation and evolution. The Lumini had modified theirs in pursuit of perfection, while humans had let theirs evolve naturally. But the core remained the same in both species. This changes everything, Vestra said, her usual composure slipping. Our people's resistance to human DNA, it's based on a lie. We're not corrupting our genetic purity, we're reconnecting with our own past. But before they could process this revolutionary discovery, alarms blared throughout the facility. Security barriers slammed into place as armed Lumini guards poured into the laboratory, led by a grim-faced Elder Carix. By order of the High Council, this facility is now under quarantine, Carix announced. All research materials are to be seized, and the human is to be detained. What? Samantha stepped forward, but Theron pulled her back. You can't do this. Don't you understand what we've just discovered? Oh, we understand perfectly, a new voice said. Elder Rylix, head of the Lumini Science Council, emerged from behind the guards. We've been monitoring your work. Did you think we wouldn't notice when you accessed the forbidden archives? Theron's inner light flared with anger. Forbidden? You've been suppressing this knowledge? For how long? For as long as necessary, Rylix replied coldly. Our society is built on the principle of self-directed evolution. If our people learned that we were engineered by ancient aliens, that we share common ancestry with primitive species like humans, it would destroy everything we've built. It would free them, Samantha countered. Show them that diversity isn't a weakness to be engineered away, but a strength to be embraced. Your genetic crisis isn't a failure, it's your ancestors' legacy reasserting itself. A subtle shift rippled through the guards. Several of them exchanged glances, their inner light flickering with uncertainty. Even Carix seemed troubled. The embryo, Vestra suddenly called out. Its quantum signature is changing. All eyes turned to the incubation chamber, where their hybrid embryo had begun to pulse with an unprecedented brilliance. The light it emitted wasn't just bioluminescence, it was producing quantum patterns that their instruments could barely measure. It's expressing both genetic lineages, Samantha explained, reading the data. Not fighting them, not merging them, but allowing them to coexist and enhance each other. This is what your ancestors intended, not perfection, but endless possibility. Rylix raised his hand, and the guards leveled their weapons. Enough. This abomination ends now. Destroy the specimen and all research data. But before anyone could move, the facility's power grid suddenly surged. Every screen, every holographic display, began broadcasting the same data, the proof of shared ancestry between humans and Lumini, now visible to everyone in the city. What have you done? Rylix demanded. Samantha smiled grimly. Nothing. But it seems Dr. Norton got my last transmission. And he's not the only one who believes the truth should be free. Through the laboratory's crystal walls, they could see lights coming on across the city as the information spread. Crowds were gathering in the streets, their combined bioluminescence creating waves of light that rippled through the darkness. You can't stop this, Theron said quietly to Rylix. Our people have always known something was missing. Now they know what it is. The elder scientist seemed to age before their eyes, his proud bearing crumbling. You don't understand what you've done. The chaos this will cause. Not chaos, Samantha corrected him. Evolution. Your ancestors knew its value. That's why they left us this gift, this shared heritage that we're only now beginning to understand. As if in response to her words, the hybrid embryo's light pulsed stronger, its quantum signature singing a song of possibility that neither species had heard for millennia. It was the dawn of a new era, but whether it would bring harmony or discord remained to be seen. The next 48 hours transformed the Lamini world into a battlefield of ideas. The revelation of their shared ancestry with humans had split their society down the middle. While younger Lamini flooded the streets in celebration of their rediscovered heritage, conservative factions barricaded themselves in the ancient halls of power, desperately trying to maintain control. Samantha, Theron, and their team worked tirelessly in their secured laboratory, knowing they were racing against time. The successful hybrid embryo had become a symbol of hope for many, but also a target for those who saw it as a threat to their way of life. Another transmission from Earth, Vestra announced, her crystalline form dimmed with exhaustion. The World Science Council is less than pleased with your unauthorized genetic experiments. Samantha barely looked up from her work. Tell them to get in line. Right now, we have bigger problems. Indeed they did. Their instruments had detected concerning fluctuations in the embryo's quantum field. The breakthrough that had seemed so promising was becoming unstable. The quantum coherence is failing, Theron reported, his usual calm voice tight with worry. The genetic integration isn't holding. Outside their lab, they could hear the sounds of protest and counter-protest. The city's crystalline structures amplified the chaos, creating a discordant symphony of conflict that matched their inner turmoil. Dr. Rivers. A young Lamini researcher burst into the lab, his light pulsing with urgency. The preservation force is coming. Elder Rylix has convinced the Emergency Council that your research poses an existential threat to our species. They're sending troops to seize everything. Samantha shared a look with Theron. They had known this might happen, had prepared for it, but the reality was still shocking. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less. They sprang into action, implementing emergency protocols they had hoped never to use. Vestra began transferring their research data through secure channels to sympathetic facilities across the planet. Theron worked to stabilize the embryo for possible transport. But Samantha had one more card to play. She pulled out a small device, something she had been working on in secret during her scarce free moments. What is that? Theron asked, his light flickering with curiosity despite the crisis. A quantum resonance amplifier, she explained, connecting it to their main systems. Based on our discovery about the precursor's genetic markers. If I'm right, it should help stabilize the quantum coherence patterns in the embryo. And if you're wrong? She managed a grim smile. Then we're no worse off than we are now. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The preservation force was getting closer. Samantha's hands flew over the controls, making final adjustments to her device. Theron, I need you to trust me, she said, not looking up. What I'm about to do, it goes against everything in your scientific training. The Lamini scientist moved closer, his light steady. You've already shattered most of my preconceptions, Dr. Rivers. What's one more? She activated the device. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, a new pattern began to emerge in their readings. The quantum field around the embryo wasn't just stabilizing, it was expanding. Impossible, Vestra whispered, watching the data stream across their screens. The quantum coherence, it's synchronizing with the building's crystal matrix. The effect spread rapidly through the facility's organic architecture. The walls began to pulse with a new kind of light, different from their usual bioluminescence. It was as if the ancient quantum patterns in their shared DNA had awakened something in the very structure of Lamini technology. The door burst open. Armed troops poured in, led by Elder Rylix himself. "Stop this at once," he commanded. "You're interfering with forces you don't understand." "No," Samantha countered, standing her ground. "We're finally understanding them as we should. Look." The quantum resonance had reached the embryo chamber. The hybrid life form within was glowing with unprecedented stability, its quantum signature now perfectly balanced between human and Lumini patterns. But more than that, it was somehow connecting with the troops themselves, their own bioluminescence synchronizing with its pulse. What is happening to us?" one of the soldiers asked, lowering his weapon as his inner light shifted. "Nothing is happening to you," Theron explained gently. "This is who we always were." The precursors didn't just seed life across the galaxy, they built quantum entanglement into our very beings. We're all connected, all part of the same cosmic dance. We just forgot how to hear the music. Rylak stepped forward, his aged features twisted with conflicting emotions. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. Our society is built on order, on controlled progress." "Your society is dying," Samantha interrupted, but not unkindly. "You can feel it, can't you? The resonance? That's not chaos you're feeling, it's life itself, reaching out across the gulf of time and space to remind us where we came from. And where we could go, if we're brave enough to take that step." The quantum field continued to expand, now visible even to the naked eye, a lattice of light connecting everything and everyone in the room. The troops looked to their leaders for guidance, but found them just as transfixed by the phenomenon. In that moment of uncertainty, destiny hung in the balance. But more challenges lay ahead, and the true test of both species' ability to change was only beginning. The quantum resonance field had transformed the Lumini research facility into something unprecedented, a space where the boundaries between human and alien technology, between past and future, seemed to blur and merge. But it was what happened next that would truly change everything. As the field stabilized, the hybrid embryo began to develop at an accelerated rate. Its quantum signature pulsed in perfect harmony with both human and Lumini patterns, creating a cascade effect throughout the crystalline city. The ancient structures, built with technology that the Lumini themselves had forgotten, awakened to its call. "The entire city's quantum matrix is responding," Vestra reported, her voice filled with wonder. "It's as if the buildings themselves remember." Elder Rylak stepped closer to the embryo chamber, his aged features illuminated by its glow. "These patterns," he whispered. "I've seen them before, in the deepest archives. The ones we were told never to access. The precursors' original designs," Theron realized. "Our ancestors didn't just build with crystals, they grew them, using quantum resonance patterns encoded in their own DNA. Patterns we share." Samantha checked the readings on her device. "The quantum field is stabilizing throughout the city. And look at these genetic markers, they're reactivating dormant sequences in both the hybrid embryo and the surrounding Lumini population." The guards who had come to shut down their research now stood transfixed, their own bioluminescence synchronizing with the ancient rhythms. Some of the younger ones had begun to exhibit subtle changes, their crystalline forms becoming more fluid, more adaptable. "You have to stop this," Rylak pleaded, but his voice lacked conviction. "The changes, they're spreading too fast. Our people aren't ready." "They're more ready than you think," a new voice announced. The crowd parted to reveal Elder Carrix, but he was changed. His usually rigid crystalline form now rippled with new patterns of light, and his voice carried an authority that came not from rank, but from understanding. "The Council has been monitoring the quantum cascade through the city," Carrix continued. "The changes aren't just physical, our people are remembering. Ancient knowledge, encoded in our very beings, is reawakening. And they're not afraid. They're evolving." As if to prove his words, the first of the hybrid embryos, the one that had started everything, began its final stage of development. The quantum field around it intensified, and within the incubation chamber, a new life took form. The child that emerged was neither human nor Lumini, yet somehow both. Its form was crystalline but fluid, capable of shifting between states. Its DNA was a perfect fusion of both species' strengths, stabilized by the quantum patterns they shared. But most remarkably, it glowed with a light that spoke of infinite potential. The quantum resonance, it's not just affecting the child, Samantha observed, checking her instruments. It's creating a template for sustainable genetic diversity throughout the Lumini population. Your people can have children again, but they'll be different. More adaptable. More like your ancestors intended. And the human influence? Rylix asked, unable to hide his concern. Is exactly what we needed, Theron answered. Look at the data. Human DNA isn't corrupting our genetic line, it's restoring the adaptability we engineered out of ourselves. We thought we were perfecting our species, but we were only limiting it. The news spread through the city like wildfire. Crowds gathered in the streets, their combined bioluminescence creating auroras that danced through the crystal spires. But unlike the chaos they had feared, the change brought something else, hope. In the days that followed, more hybrid children were born, each unique, each carrying the combined legacy of two species that had evolved on different worlds but shared a common origin. The Lumini began to remember their true heritage, not as beings of perfect stasis, but as children of stars, meant to grow and change and explore. Earth's response, when it finally came, was mixed. Some called for Samantha's arrest for unauthorized genetic experimentation. Others saw the potential for a new era of human-alien cooperation. But in the end, the decision wasn't really theirs to make. The changes had already begun, not just on the Lumini world, but in humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. 1 month after the quantum cascade, Samantha stood with Theron and Vestra in the newly established Interspecies Research Center. Through the crystal walls, they could see hybrid children playing in gardens that pulsed with quantum-enhanced life, their laughter carrying the same musical quality as the Lumini's ancient songs. We still have so much to learn, Samantha said, watching a young hybrid shift its form to climb a crystalline tree. About our shared past, about the precursors, about what we might become. Together, Theron added, his light pulsing with contentment. That's what our ancestors intended, I think. Not for us to remain separate and static, but to find each other again, to remember that we're all part of the same cosmic story. Vestra, who had been monitoring the latest data from their ongoing research, looked up with excitement. The quantum resonance patterns we discovered, they're not just limited to our two species. We're detecting similar signatures from other worlds, other civilizations. More cousins to meet, Samantha smiled. More bridges to build. As they stood there, watching the future unfold in the playing children below, none of them could say for certain what that future would bring. But they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced all others, with curiosity, courage, and the unshakable belief that life, in all its infinite diversity, would find a way to thrive. The quantum field that surrounded their world pulsed one final time, like a cosmic heartbeat, reminding them that they were all part of something greater, a grand experiment in life and evolution that had begun with the precursors and would continue as long as there were stars in the sky and beings brave enough to reach for them.